Hello everybody, this is Dan from Screaming Donkey Woodwork, and today we're going to take some wood that would have ended up in the fireplace 10 years ago and turn it into something super cool. There is a very good argument that all of this maple that I worked with probably should have ended up in a fireplace. It sat on a back lot for about 6 years and then got milled up and air dried for about 5 years and then made its way into my garage and sat there for another 2.5 years. And we'll get back to that, but right now you're looking at the moment that I decided I need a real table saw. You just watched the first time ever that I attempted a joint on my table saw. I've known for a long time that this is terrible, and because of that, my technique is terrible. But I've had a CNC machine for about 4 years, and for those of you that don't know, you can joint pretty easy on a CNC machine, as a matter of fact. I would venture to say that it probably takes me less time to do than it would take someone to do on a joiner. I really just did it this way to see if I could actually do it. I did it, but it sucked. So yeah, I'm getting a bigger saw with more table surface area. I don't recommend trying this on a 20-year-old skill saw. I probably started my woodworking adventure backward from everyone else because I bought a CNC machine first. The first time I ever jointed was on a CNC machine. See, I didn't have the money to go ahead and buy a joiner and a nice table saw and all that stuff when I began, so I really investigated what will give me the most bang for my buck, and it ended up being about a $2,000 CNC machine. And then when I made it through about 45 different projects, it just wore out, and it was time to decide if I was going to upgrade. Thankfully, I had enough customers where it made sense, and I was able to upgrade to a larger CNC machine. Now, if you think that maple was terrible, look at this walnut. Almost all of the live edge on it is punky. It came off this easy with just a wire wheel. And when I say punky, that just means it was really soft and kind of feels like balsa wood. It's so soft you can break it with your fingers. I didn't need to use my 20-year-old roofing hatchet. This particular piece of walnut that I'm working with has a ton of character to it. There was a little bit of a burl to it, as you can see on the right-hand side. And then there was a whole lot of curl on the left-hand side, which made for some awesome chatoyance, and that's just a nerdy word for very sparkly wood. Totally got to work on my Valley Girl impression. And burls and curly wood look totally awesome when you finish them. The problem is they're not desirable for making furniture. There isn't much predictability in their strength, and it's not the choice that most woodworkers would make, say if they were going to build legs for something. It's not all that predictable how it's going to change throughout the season. So as the wood swells, it may swell in one direction and another direction at the same time. Whereas straight grain wood, it's very predictable in what it's going to do with its seasonal changes. For this project, I thought through this a whole lot, which wood I was going to use. Was I going to get some super nice flat straight grain maple? Was I going to pick out the ugliest burls I could find for the walnut? And what I came down to was, what is Harry Potter really about? I love the eclectic look of the movie. I love how there is a mishmash of items together that somehow form this beautiful construct. I love how the stories themselves are fundamentally a battle between good and evil. So which one's good and which one's evil? Obviously the walnut is good because, I mean, this walnut looks friggin' gorgeous. And the maple is evil because it sat around for many years doing nothing. And pretty much nobody would want to do anything with this wood. The initial temptation when making this table was to take a bunch of Harry Potter memorabilia and cast it into the table. But in my mind's eye, it always just kept coming back to silhouettes. I thought it would be really cool to be able to put silhouettes in layers inside the river on this table. So that's what we're going to do. This was nothing special. This is something I've done before, where we carve out the wood, make a void for the epoxy, fill it with epoxy, flatten it out, and then you end up with a silhouette. The magic of this one is going to come from two different places. The stacked silhouettes and that void that you see, it looks like a big notch taken out of the maple. Here you can see why I marked everything up, because that way with the CNC, then all I would have to do is take the pattern, find a centerpiece that would fit between, kind of measure it out, and then everything would wind up in the correct spot on the river. This job wasn't like the liquid core table where I kind of had to figure everything out when I got to it. The challenge of this one came more along the lines of figuring out the order. I knew what I had to do, but making sure that I did it in the proper order was massively challenging. I think I wrote the list out of what order to do everything in like 4 times for this table. As I make more and more complex tables, I'm realizing how important of a skill that is to just sit down and plan out how you're going to build everything and the order you're going to build it out in. What I just finished taping up was the backside of that large void. And if I didn't do that first, what would end up happening is I'd probably end up pouring the epoxy in like Professor Snape first, and then realize, oh my God, I can't pour it in that big knot hole there and fill that up because I didn't tape the bottom of it. I can't really flip it over because it's got epoxy on it now. So it would have cost me an extra day. And I had to make several sacrifices in design quality to ensure that I had a good build quality. I mean, who cares if the table that you make looks really good if it just falls apart? As straightforward as this part is, it's always fun to do and always fun to watch. I lack necessary manual dexterity skills, so I cheat using these syringes. Every once in a while, you'll see me throw caution to the wind and grab the cup and try to pour it into the void. And every single time I make a giant mess with it. I am incredibly jealous of people with fantastic manual dexterity. If the fate of the world ever comes down to my ability to draw a straight line, we're all screwed. Which is a really odd one to me because I can kind of draw well, because drawing has more to do with your ability to conceptualize something than it does have to do with your dexterity, because the pencil has an eraser and you can just keep scribbling in an area until you get the line dark like you want it to be the main line. So if you ask me to draw a face, as long as I have a pencil with an eraser, I can do it. I think the sorting hat is my favorite silhouette. I have no idea why. I couldn't tell you why. I am a big fan of the Harry Potter movies. I think my wife and I have watched them 3 or 4 times together. I think it's because it's the one universal thing that my whole family has done together. So all of us have watched those movies together. Both of my boys. So I only have one boy that's into Star Wars, but all of us watched and enjoyed the Harry Potter movies. So here we went through, we already did our pour with the Wisebond tabletop epoxy. Wisebond. And now we have to take off where I poured too much. And it's always better to pour a little bit too much than a little bit too little. Epoxy shrinks as it cures, and also a little bit of it is going to seep into the wood. For some unknown reason, I thoroughly enjoy sanding, so I decided to skip trimming it up with the bit from the CNC and to sand the whole thing down first. I think I just got that new sander. I was very excited to be using that Festool sander. It took about the same amount of time either way that I did it. So if I would have poured more epoxy on there, definitely using the CNC machine to clean it up first would have been the faster way to go. But since it was just barely over poured, the sander cut right through it. There's a little bit of a trick to doing that is you don't want to put any pressure on it. Otherwise, you'll end up with wood divots on the opposite sides of the epoxy. So you really are just resting your hand on the sander when you sand off epoxy like that. And now we can share why there's a big cutout in the side of the table there. What we're making is a drawer that opens with a magic wand. This piece of walnut actually came from the same tree as the top did. And another thing is that it has this nice hole in it, which we will be able to fill up with some colored epoxy. I thought it would look really cool. It kind of reminded me of the Harry Potter lightning bolt. It was during this time that the argument was really raging about whether we should use any colors in the table as to like put some magic in the table. And what I ended up settling on was we would only use a very limited amount of color and go for a real elegant look with this table. And now we clean up that big notch I left out because that is where our little magical drawer is going to go. I used a rounded bit to cut the pocket out on this drawer because I really wanted rounded edges on the bottom of the box. It was the first time I did it, and I didn't take small enough slices, so it ended up with this pattern on the bottom of it. But I really dug it. Like I could have just stuck a flattening bit in there, or I could have just manually gone over it or even sanded it. But I thought it looked really cool and I wanted to leave it. But if you want to do that, all you have to do is make sure that the overlap is really small when you use one of those rounded bits. Now here's something curious that happened. So I have this MOB, mother of all bits. I call it the Finger Chopper Offer 5000. It was my first time using it, and there was definitely some puckering going on. Now this thing did an awesome job at removing a whole lot of material quickly, but as you can see, I keep rubbing my finger over it because I'm like, hey, there's like a lip there. And the curious part is that what I ended up finding was that my table was no longer level. And for some more experienced woodworkers out there, I am curious how this happened. I kind of figured I would level it once and never ever think about it ever again. Obviously, that's not how it all went down, and I'm wondering, did the router shake it loose? I did have to repair the router because Bosch has this weird problem with their routers where the clip that holds the adjustment screw in place can pop off if you accidentally turn it too hard while it's still locked. It was a pretty easy fix though, because all I had to do was replace that with a drill bit collar. There's a couple of screws that you can take off that detach the router from the router plate, and that's what I did. So I'm wondering, like, maybe I unscrewed some screws thinking they were for dropping the router down, or my question to the more experienced woodworkers is this just something that happens periodically that I need to check all the time? I've only been using the router table for about a year, so I really don't know. And I think I only use it probably once every 2 weeks. And usually I use it for an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on how much work I've run across it. Using the router table is actually another favorite part of mine. Oh, I love that ka-chunk. A couple of passes on the planer and we got the height all settled. It fits exactly where it's supposed to fit. So I had to put some slots in it, and then with those slots, that would be like my drawer pull in out system for this. Now I wasn't perfect here just because there wasn't a whole lot of edge to rest it on. So that's what you saw me doing beforehand. I was practicing my motions before I made the cut. I made the same cut on the table and glued this floating tenon in, so then that would be the rails for our drawer. I thought about putting some kind of sliders in there or something, but I really just couldn't come up with anything that would fit and keep the table low profile. Plus, the wood ka-chunk that a wood drawer makes on wood rails is an awesome sound. And I wanted the drawer to be completely removable. It's so tiny that it has the little ridges in it, so it might be a showpiece. We're going to keep the wand in there so it doesn't get lost. I just thought you would probably want to be able to pull it out all the way. I don't know what anybody else calls this part, but I call it rub and find the shiny part. So if you have friction between two pieces of wood, the easiest way to figure out, at least for me, where that's at, is just to repeat the action like 20 times, and the wood will actually become shiny right where the friction is. And then you can go back and hand sand wherever it's shiny, and eventually it'll fit perfect. You can find a million things on YouTube, but what you can't find is boring content. For the most part, we have to make things that are interesting that people will want to watch. And I'm positive I wouldn't want to watch somebody trying to find the shiny spots on wood and sand them off. Just logistically, that's pretty tough because you got to get it to have the light hit it just the right way so you can see it on camera. But I do try to take the opportunity to talk about those things as they come up. I don't think anybody's using my videos as tutorials to build anything. And I'm pretty sure the majority of people that are watching are just waiting for me to drop something on my unprotected feet. But I have to say things every once in a while that make it sound like I know what I'm doing. Trust me, I don't. I'm on YouTube just as much, if not more, than everyone else trying to figure out how I'm going to do the next thing. And I mess up a lot of stuff. Jonathan Katz-Moses has been doing this series on making all these different types of joints, and it's just awesome. But my favorite part of it is how he comes across and is like, all right, here's how you fix all of your screw-ups with sawdust and glue. We need more of that. We need more of, you're not making a perfect product, you're making a perfect end product. So not everything is going to be perfect throughout the process. And it can't be, because wood just chips out sometimes. There's a weak spot in it that you have nothing to do with, and a piece of it's just going to come out. So if I were going to make a YouTube video and try to make like a perfect looking joint like the first time we put it together, I would 100% do it with pine. I mean, I'm pretty sure I could teach my grandma how to make a perfect bow tie using pine. So for the people who have those great manual dexterity skills, this is where my jealousy really goes out, because there are some people who can do it with hardwood every single time, at least a bow tie, right? But if you put dovetail joints in front of them, they're not going to be perfect, but at the end they are going to look perfect. And that's what we want to achieve, is the perfect look, not necessarily the perfect process. Speaking of, this is an awesome example of it. So my molds tend to leak, and this one leaked. So we put the tabletop epoxy in there. It's thicker. You know, this first layer was tabletop, so it's more like a peanut butter, but it still leaked, which means I had a pretty huge hole in there. But that's all part of the process, right? So I plugged that leak up, and we didn't have any leaks after that. It took like 20 seconds to fix it. Not a whole lot leaked out. I think I lost about a teaspoon of epoxy. The process isn't perfect, but the results, well, actually, for that very section, are far from perfect, but I have some ideas on how I can improve the next time. All right, so it's a layer of tabletop epoxy in there now, and what we're going to do is pour a layer of deep pour on that. And we had to scuff it up first because epoxy does not like to stick to cured epoxy. We're doing that so it has something to grip onto. As you can see, this table has multiple pours, and multiple pours down the river with a wood backing equals taco wood. All that epoxy in that river is going to shrink, and it's going to only be able to shrink towards itself. So it's going to start pulling on that maple really hard, and it's going to turn this whole piece into a big taco. But we don't care because we're just going to flatten it. So here I'm running the CNC by hand and flattening out this top layer of epoxy so we can go ahead and put in another layer of our silhouettes. And here you can see why I'm flattening, because the surface of the epoxy is a little bit warped. Now, the table didn't move at all, and it's in the exact same spot it was when I poured it. So it should pour and spread out perfectly level, right? Yeah, in theory, but the reality of it is that epoxy shrinks and it's pulling the wood up. And it's only very slight changes. Actually, from one side of the table to the other side of the table, we're talking about 2.5 millimeters. But that right there is enough to throw off my carve-in for the next set of silhouettes. So I have to flatten it out first. Coming up here down at the end of this river, you might notice that there's a piece of fabric in the table. Well, that's a custom-made scarf by Twisted Stitcher. There's not a clear shot of it here, but there will be shortly. So if you need something weird crocheted, call my friend Helena at Twisted Stitcher. Twisted Stitcher, crocheting for assholes since 1999. You may notice I'm moving a little bit gingerly here with the vacuum cleaner, vacuuming all this up, and that's because if I suck up too much of this epoxy at once, it will literally clog up the vacuum tube. I could just throw this in a huge pile of sand or in wood dust and no problem. But the fibers that are created from the epoxy, they can clog up that 2-inch hole, no problem. Now, if I would have left my dust boot on here on the CNC, which is the little brush that goes around the head of the CNC there, it would have got up all of that dust as we were going, but you wouldn't have been able to see the carve-in then, and I wanted to be able to show the carve-in, so we let a little bit of this epoxy fly around the table and then vacuumed it up right afterward. Ooh, that's the owl there. It's a hoot. So I was really excited about this pour because this is the first time I would have multiple silhouettes on it, and I got so excited when I saw it because you see the shadow there that's underneath the owl and underneath the letter. I thought that was so super cool. What do you get excited about in life? Shadows under my epoxy. So as I have come to learn, Wisebond epoxy can sometimes look a little bit cloudy when I pour it in, and it typically has to do with where I keep it in my shop. So very often I keep it too close to the air conditioner, but it doesn't bother me or worry me because I always know that when it does clear up, it is going to go crystal clear. I always keep my big stash in the house, but if we have half a bottle left, it goes in the garage. And then whenever I pour that half a bottle, there's always this like white cloudiness to it, but then it does clear up. I ended up doing one more layer of silhouettes. This is just showing how it runs on the CNC with the CNC trail. You can see there's the Dementor with the stag in the middle of it. And the placement over this one is actually my favorite because it's over the wood burl. So it's kind of an Easter egg. You have to know that it's there to see it. Running the CNC machine sometimes is very hypnotizing. I could just sit there and stare at it. I'm not sure if it has the same effect over video that it has in person. It should be more annoying because I have to wear headphones when I do it, because sometimes the cuts can sound like screeching death. But there is just something about it that is kind of hypnotizing. Watching a pattern and shape come to life right in front of you. I don't know if you guys feel the same about it, but I definitely get stuck there looking at it every once in a while when I could be back doing something else or working on my editing skills. Appropriately, the last cut is the little Harry Potter HP. Just like the other ones, we'll go ahead and fill those in with black epoxy and come back and flatten everything down, and then pour our last layer of Wisebond deep pour epoxy. And this is where I know exactly what my river is going to look like. I really liked the look of the maple being at the bottom of this river. If I were to do it again, though, I think I would try to maybe tint the maple with a little bit of white. I think it would look a little bit more cool. I don't know. It would pop out a little bit more. And I think I love the way that maple and white oak look when they have a little bit of that white stain to them. I'm not sure how well it would hold up under the epoxy, whether I would be risking messing up the bond there, but I'm going to think that one through more and figure out a way to do that in some future project. I've spared you watch the flattening of this because we've seen a ton of flattening in this video already, but I did want to show you the pour in for something here. Can you tell what those are? If you said footsteps from the map, you are correct. And we have a final little Easter egg in this table for the last of the black epoxy pours. Bonus points to anyone who can answer in the comments of why the feet are like this. And if you don't know what it is, just look for another comment with an answer to it, because it is hilarious. So after Becca filled in all the feet, she's taken some CA glue and filling in all the little cracks and divots that are remaining. And we got some accelerator on the cheap. We didn't get the Starbond accelerator. It works very well, but as you can see, it kind of crystallized the top of the CA glue. And she was really worried that she was going to have to go back and redo all those spots, even maybe dig some out. But we actually had no refills. The CA glue worked perfectly, and that kind of just never happens. When the holes are a little bit bigger or it's a wormhole that doesn't seem to have a bottom to it, we use the UV epoxy on there. And the reason being that if you just filled it up with CA glue, the CA glue at the bottom would never really harden. It would eventually, but you would end up with a small pool of CA glue in there. So this really works quite a bit better. In the beginning, I used CA glue way too much. You try to fill in your bigger holes with epoxy, and then you fill in the small holes with the CA glue. And the issue would be that you kind of have these middle-sized holes that you think you can fill up with CA glue, and then you put the hardener on it, and then the table dries a day later, and there's a void under it because the CA glue that was there didn't harden and seeped into the wood. So I spent a whole lot of time like carving out CA glue that had been seeped in. I mean, not a whole lot of time, but some time. This next part's pretty cool. I decided I was going to go ahead and put a brass inlay in there, and decided I was going to cut it in with the hand router. So we just went ahead and routed it in and shaped it up a little bit with the file and glued it in with some CA glue. Well, epoxy and CA glue. I could say the CA glue is good for holding it down in place, and the epoxy is good for filling up any voids that may have come from running the router bit. Again, another first for me. I would say the thing that I learned from doing that is be careful how quickly you put the brass rod in, because if you have epoxy down in there, a bunch of it will shoot at the end if you smack it into place really fast. Seems like a common sense thing on why it happened, but that it's going to happen, I think you probably are going to go through it once. Here, there was a low spot. We knew we were going to have to backfill the table just an eighth of an inch near this drawer, and Becca poured about a quarter inch, and it took forever to sand it off, so I had to bust out the belt sander to break it down. This was definitely as much my fault as it was Becca's fault, because I looked at it and I was like, oh yeah, it looks fine. But it is nice to have Becca here because if anything does go wrong, I could just be like, it was totally Becca's fault. I'm doing some practice here because I have to drill a hole on the side for a magnet to go in that will lock our drawer. The hole doesn't have to be perfect and it could be slightly oversized, but I figured I would practice it a little bit just to make sure I had the technique down before I went ahead and took this Dremel over the table and potentially ruined it. As you can see, it's rather close to the edge of the table there, so any little screw up, slip up, and I would have made a mess of this. And we already talked about how I don't have the greatest manual dexterity, so anytime I have to do something that requires good manual dexterity, I do a little practice run. As you can see, it was a little bit snug here on the first try, so the bottom of the hole needed a little bit more boring out. Ah, excellent. Now the only thing left is to make sure the wand works and drill out a corresponding hole on the drawer. Looks like our wand is a success. There's a little magnet in the end of the wand there, and this wand was actually made by a TikToker named Cole Vander's Magic Wands. Cole Vander's, if you're buying your wands from somewhere else, go f*** yourself, you piece of shit. Wow, that is a pretty aggressive business slogan. I think that might be worse than the Screaming Donkey wand. Screaming Donkey Woodwork, 'cause f*** 'em, that's why. I can't put my finger on it, but I really just feel like my slogan is much more family friendly. And since I made something cool, I'm obliged to pull my wife out to the shop to show it to her. Ooh. And that was a real ooh, not dripping with sarcasm. All right, so some of the videos are a little out of order, and it's just so it makes a little bit more sense to me to narrate. I decided on going for a chamfer on the top side. So something I wanted to call attention to was the full design of this. We used terrible wood to make something that will ultimately end up being beautiful, because ultimately that's what I love most about Harry Potter is the eclectic things that are pulled together that make this beautiful canvas. And I'm hoping that I did the same here with this table. For some reason unknown to me, Becca skipped doing the top of the drawer here, so I went back and finished it with the Natura Natural. And the reason that it's so important to do that is without finishing everything, you make a good chance for the wood to warp.
Mr. Sulu, ahead warp 1.
After a thorough sanding, Becca starts to make a progression through the wet sanding. If you pay real close attention, you could see the spot where she missed sanding it and I had to come back. The typical progression that I make through the wet sanding is 400, 600, 800, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000. Not too long ago, I purchased this orbital sander / buffer, and the reason being that the sander wasn't working all that great with wet sanding. I do have to say, after this one, this is probably the least amount of scratches that I've ever had in a clear top, except for the part that Becca missed. Buffing, we're using a wool pad and the 3M Heavy. And then sometimes I use some Arctics too, depends on how much I have to cut off the top. And then we finish off the top with a machine polish. But I don't get to finish because Becca hates me and secretly plants landmines in my tables for me to find. And there, I just found it. I think this took all of 10 minutes to fix. Fixes are pretty simple. You just go back to whatever grit you need to and then make the circles progressively bigger as you go higher and higher in grit until you get to the end, all the way to the machine polish. I can tell you the first time you get this right, you definitely get a nice smug attitude about it afterward. Here, Becca's going through and cleaning out the machine polish and the cutting compound using a spray bottle of water. As you can see, it gets thoroughly drenched, so it is important to assist the drying process as soon as you're done with that. Towel it all off, leave something on there to absorb the rest of the moisture that is there. Once it's thoroughly dried, she's going to come back and clean it with some mineral spirits. Well, that's not exactly right. Once it's dry, she's going to feel the table and make sure that there are no spots that need to be resanded up to 320 on the wood. And after she does that sanding, then she's going to clean it with mineral spirits, and then she's going to use the Natura and spread that all around the table. And typically we use a popsicle stick. We used to use a squeegee, but it's been a long time going since we've used one before. And that's just because it really gets scummed up on the squeegee, and the popsicle stick is pretty easy. She just spreads it all around, and then she's going to grab a non-abrasive white pad and rub it all into the grain. Now you notice she's going right over the epoxy, and that is because you can wipe all of that off the epoxy, but if you don't put it on there, it'll leave a weird little transition line. So I've gone as far as like doing all the way up to the edges with Q-tips and everything, but this still ends up looking better. On our live, I made this little snitch pull out for the drawer. Beck and I did a head-to-head competition to see who could make the better pull. I totally smoked her. And just to be a German word for shower, I made this little snitch and a Dobby sock out of wood as pullouts while she made her. I don't even know what it ended up being. It was really bad, though. It was the Harry Potter lightning bolt. It was actually okay. And last but not least, we finished this table off with a nano coating. I want it to be a useful table for my customer, so I definitely want them to put stuff on here, and the nano coating helps with that. They can't put hot stuff on it, but they'll be able to spill things on it and not have to worry that it's going to ruin the table. Speaking of nano coating, I'm officially starting to do my testing this week on a bunch of different nano coats to see if I can't figure out a way to save you guys a couple of bucks, because I think the nano coating choices that are out there are just way too expensive. Here is our finished product, and look at that chatoyance. Remember, we taught you that word earlier. I am super happy with how this turned out, and I hope you guys like it too. And if you do, I think now's a good time to say, please like, share, and most importantly, subscribe and watch the whole video. I have got a lot of cool projects coming up, and I wouldn't want you to miss out. There's like 2 terrible projects coming up on, and you can totally just skip watching those. But a good like 80%, maybe 60, 40, at least 35% of them are worth watching. Until then, get weird with wood. If you've liked what you've seen and you want to see more, why not click on one of these videos? What else are you going to do? Play with your pickle table? Join a Russian dating site? Finally tell Big Shirley you love her? Hug that dog you saw in the park? Watch the Goonies in your underwear? Velcro yourself to the ceiling again? Get that itchy rash checked out by the doctor? Learn to play the harpsichord?